Hello, dear friends. Some people don't understand that Afghanistan is a humanitarian emergency, and that I just summarize news without taking sides or trying to make politics out of human suffering. Opinion piece. Invented a flying saucer. Solar-powered ozone-restoring flying saucer. Hurricane Henri emergency in New York City. Hurricane Grace unleashes severe flooding in Mexico. Thousands of Afghans besiege Kabul airport amid gunfire. US warns citizens to avoid Kabul airport. Afghan allies unable to evacuate by end of August. Sanchez and Biden agree on use of Rota and Moron to host Afghans. Desperate crowds storm aid trucks in Haiti. Let's start. A gyroscopical stabilized vertical takeoff and landing saucer-shaped aircraft, which has the ability to restore the ozone layer, has been invented and patented by Herbert Martin, a resident of Paducah, Kentucky, USA. The flying saucer invention is solar-powered and can remain aloft in space indefinitely. It can completely overthrow the last 150 years of environmentally damaging petroleum-powered transportation vessels, and even replace the global rocketry program with an environmentally restoring option, the flying saucer. The idea is here. We just need funding to build the prototypes. An aircraft that is housed within a gyroscope, providing for improved flight stability, that includes an inner hull which remains stationary within a rotating outer hull. A rotating sine wave is used to activate and move a plurality of pistons, which will intake air from above the upper surface of the inner hull configuration and create a negative pressure on the aircraft. The craft contains compression chambers which receive the air and which fed the various impeller thrusters, which are rotational within 3/4 of a hemisphere. Emergency. A state of emergency in New York City for Hurricane Henri. The National Hurricane Center reported that Hurricane Henri was gaining strength, with winds of 120 kilometers per hour, and was expected to hit Long Island, New York, or southern New England Sunday night. Governor Andrew Cuomo has declared a state of emergency for parts of New York ahead of Hurricane Henri. Hurricane Henri could be the first hurricane to make a direct hit on Long Island since the 80s. Hurricane Grace unleashes severe flooding in Mexico. Hurricane Grace lashed Mexico with torrential rains on Saturday, causing severe flooding and landslides that killed at least 8 people, after becoming one of the most powerful storms in years on the country's Gulf Coast. Grace moves inland across eastern Mexico with rain and wind. Hurricane Grace was moving inland across eastern Mexico on Saturday with strong winds and rain, after making landfall off the coast of the state of Veracruz as a Category 3. Rescue in Afghanistan. Thousands of Afghans besiege Kabul airport amid gunfire in the vicinity. Thousands of people tried to stage a fresh entry into Kabul airport this morning, frightened by gunfire being heard steadily around the facility, amid a new chaotic day as the US and Germany began to expand their evacuation operations beyond the airport facility. Children, the elderly, and even pregnant women are desperately struggling to get into the airport and hopefully onto a plane to evacuate them from Kabul. US wants citizens to avoid Kabul airport, in quotes, due to potential security threats outside the gates of Kabul airport. We advise US citizens to avoid traveling to the airport and to avoid the airport gates at this time unless they receive individual instructions from a US government representative to do so, the embassy said. US airlifts Americans from 200 yards beyond Kabul airport perimeter. The commander of the 82nd Airborne Division has told his British counterpart to stop embarrassing US troops guarding Kabul airport by venturing into the city to rescue people, at least according to a Washington columnist. Troops conducted operation to rescue 169 Americans in Kabul. US troops left the airport in Kabul, Afghanistan this week and rescued 169 Americans, officials said Friday. The operation took place on Wednesday or Thursday. US to maintain force in Kabul to ensure security. The US, Britain, Canada, Denmark, Norway, and other US allies in NATO closed their embassies in Afghanistan and evacuated diplomatic staff after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban last Sunday. Washington expects to evacuate all troops, diplomats, US citizens, and Afghans who aided the occupation by August 31st. This is one of the most dangerous, in quotes, and unpredictable moments in history. Brian Dean Wright, a former CIA operations officer, explains in a brief but incisive Twitter thread that, in quotes, former intelligence colleagues are angry and deeply concerned about what has happened in Afghanistan. Wright warns that there is an almost universal belief that the US and the world are in one of the most dangerous and unpredictable times in modern history. Taliban assaults, in quotes, we are aware of a small number of instances when Americans and Afghans we wish to evacuate have been subjected to harassment and, in some cases, physical assaults, revealed defense spokesman John Kirby. Massacre against ethnic Hazara. Human rights NGO Amnesty International said Friday that the Taliban fighters carried out a brutal massacre against members of the ethnic Hazara minority last month after taking control of Afghanistan's Ghazni province. Evacuation. The international not-governmental organization Reporters Without Borders on Saturday called on President Biden to draw up a plan to evacuate journalists from Afghanistan. It's impossible to evacuate Afghan allies by the end of August. The European Union's top diplomat has declared that it is impossible for Europe to evacuate all its Afghan allies from Kabul by the end of August. Josep Borrell blamed US troops and the city's airport for preventing evacuees from leaving. European Union does not recognize Taliban politically. The European Union does not recognize the Taliban politically and confines itself only to technical contact with them, said European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The Taliban have an arsenal. The Islamists control more than 2,000 armored vehicles and up to 40 aircraft, which could include UH-60 Black Hawks helicopters and Scan Eagle military drones. The arsenal could also contain rockets, rifles, and even night vision goggles. Various US military equipment is already readily available in black markets and bazaars in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Demonstration in London for Afghanistan. The demonstration is being held under the slogan Free Afghanistan and Sanction Pakistan, in reference to Pakistan's support for the new Afghan leadership. The French take to the streets again. Tens of thousands of demonstrators took to the street in France to protest for the sixth consecutive Saturday against the obligation to have a health certificate for many of the activities of social life. Spain. A new Spanish plane has just landed at the Torrejón de Ardoz air base with 110 Afghan evacuees, the sixth since operations began. This has been confirmed by the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration through a message on a social network. Sanchez and Biden agree on the use of the Rota and Moron bases to receive Afghans. The president of the Spanish government, Pedro Sanchez, held a telephone conversation this Saturday with his American counterpart, Joe Biden, in which they agreed on the use of the military bases of Moron and Rota to temporarily receive Afghans collaborating with the US in transit to other countries. Spain's refusal to Russia violates agreement. Moscow is surprised that Spain is denying Russian ships entry to the port of Ceuta, a move that contradicts the declaration of partnerships between the two countries. Russian Foreign Minister spokesman Maria Zakharova said Saturday, in quotes, they apparently wish to demonstrate their alignment with the Russophobic wing of NATO in the run-up to the summit of the alliance members countries to be held in Madrid in 2022. Zakharova added, the heat picks up over the weekend with 40 degrees in the south and rain in the north. The heat picks up and the stable, dry and sunny weather prevails over the weekend with highs of up to 40 degrees in the provinces of Córdoba, Badajoz and Seville, contrasting with light drizzle in the far north and isolated or occasional storms in the eastern third of the peninsula. Almost 6,000 fires have burnt more than 46,000 hectares. The 5,942 fires registered in Spain until August 15th, about 724 per month on average, have already burnt more than 46,600 hectares of forest, according to the latest data. The civil guard and Morocco prevented jump to the fence of Melilla on 300 migrants. The civil guard and agents of the Moroccan forces have prevented early this morning between 250 and 300 sub-Saharan migrants accessing Melilla, irregularly jumping the border fence between Spain and Morocco. Spanish America. Argentina obtains financing. Argentina obtained between January and July of this year a positive financing of $391.161 million, informed the Ministry of Economy. Protests in Santiago de Chile. Hundreds of people marched to demand the release of prisoners detained in the wake of 2019 social outburst. Law enforcement dispersed protesters with water cannons. In particular, Congress is requested to speed up legislative procedures to pass a patent law. Changes in the Venezuela government. 7 days after the government delegation and the Venezuelan opposition shook hands in Mexico to initiate a new round of dialogue, President Maduro moved the pieces in his cabinet, generating expectations about an eventual change in national and international policy. Bolivian ex-president Añez tried to harm herself while in jail. Precisely this Wednesday, the ex-president was transferred to a hospital in El Alto, western Bolivia, without prior notification for the third time in 2 weeks. At the time, local media, quoting Añez's family, stated that she was likely to undergo a CT scan. Bolivia charges former President Añez with genocide over deaths of protesters in 2019. Bolivia's former interim president, Yanín Añez, has been charged with genocide and other crimes over the deaths of 20 people who protested the ouster of the country's socialist leader, Evo Morales, in 2019. Under Bolivian law, Añez could face 10 to 20 years in prison if convicted. Paraguayan truckers lift strike after reaching an agreement. Paraguayan truckers left Thursday the strike they started at the beginning of August after reaching a memorandum of understanding at a meeting with the executive and agro-exporting companies. López Obrador admits that the protection mechanism for journalists is not effective. The President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, admitted this Friday that the governmental mechanism for the protection of journalists is not the most effective in quotes, and ordered its revision to its head, the Undersecretary of Human Rights, Alejandro Encinas. Regional Conference on South-South Cooperation. Representatives of Ibero-American and Caribbean countries took the first step this Friday to create a regional conference on South-South cooperation by approving a resolution with this recommendation that will submit it for consideration by the Committee of the Whole in November. And disparate crowd assaults humanitarian aid trucks in Haiti. Chaotic scenes in Haiti. Hundreds of citizens stormed several humanitarian aid trucks to take the food that was to be distributed in the city of Los Cayos. Similar events took place in the small town of Vieter near Los Cayos, where a group of men were seen taking large sacks from another half-open truck. Australia. Clashes and arrests in Sydney and Melbourne. Heated protests erupted in Sydney and Melbourne as massive crowds took the streets to denounce the closure measures, with clashes with Australian police who responded with pepper spray, roadblocks and series of arrests. Mental health services in Australia are in an unprecedented level of demand. Calls to Australian mental health support lines have increased by 30% compared to the pre-crisis times, officials have revealed. Additional funding has been provided to help people cope with distress during these shutdowns. Finance. Top CEOs in the UK earn more per year than the average worker earns in a lifetime. Study finds the average annual income of a CEO in the UK is 86 times that of the average full-time worker, according to a new study, even after CEO paychecks were slashed during the crisis. Russian banks nearly doubled profits in first half of 2021. Russian lenders' net profit in January and July totaled $19.2 billion, nearly double their profits in the same period last year, the Central Bank of Russia reported. Russian police arrest 2 devil worshippers. A group of occultists involved in the murder of 2 young men in Russia's remote forests has been dismantled after another pair of its members were arrested following the confession of a Satanist couple. Middle East. Syrian air defenses shot down 22 Israeli missiles. Syria's air defenses shot down 22 of 24 Israeli missiles fired during recent airstrikes near Damascus, the Russian military said. Multiple rockets hit central Gaza Strip, trigger power outages. A possible response from the Israeli army was expected after its border guard suffered injuries during protests in Gaza early Saturday. More than 40 Palestinians were injured by Israeli soldiers at the border, the Palestinian Health Ministry confirmed. UNICEF warns of need to restore electricity in Lebanon. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, called on Saturday for the urgent restoration of power supply in Lebanon, which is facing a political and economic crisis, saying it's the only solution to keep water services running. Technology. Militarization of space. Congressional report worries about the deployment of Russian and Chinese laser and microwave weapons in space. The Congressional Research Service has accused Russia and China of engaging in the threatening activities in outer space that could harm the national security of the US and its allies, and of working to create a wide range of space weapons with offensive capabilities. Vulnerabilities of smartphones. Mobile apps and open Wi-Fi can render smartphones vulnerable, as the former can process personal data, have access to internal files, camera, and voice recorder, while the latter can expose them to easy access. Yoga virus, which subscribes to paid services on Android, is back. The Belgian police have warned of the return of the Yoga virus, which is capable of subscribing the affected user to paid services on Android devices without his authorization. Curious. Treasure hunter finds 1,400-year-old gold artifact in UK. A man hunting for treasure with a metal detector in the UK managed to find a piece made of gold from 1,400 years ago. The find was made in the Breckland region of Norfolk last April, in a place where there is no known archaeological site. It is a tiny pyramid about 6 millimeters high and 12 millimeters long at its base. The piece, made of gold and garnet stone, may have been part of an elite warrior's sweat sheath. It is believed that it may have come from India or Sri Lanka via ancient long-distance trade routes. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.